Great to be back with y'all again, but more importantly, it's really good to be out of Washington. It's good to be around so many normal people, and that includes some of you. No, look, really, I can't tell you how good it is to be home, and we are home for about 5 weeks, and have a chance to go out and do things like the meet and greets that we hosted 3 in Baton Rouge and Prairieville and in Livingston. To do open office hours where anybody can just come in the office. We're doing a town hall meeting this evening on duplication of benefits and flood recovery, telephone town hall meetings, and something we like to do called Grub with Garrett, where we'll post up in Baton Rouge, Thibodaux, Gonzales, Denham Springs, wherever, and say we're going to buy breakfast for the first 10 people that email, no matter who it is, and we buy breakfast and sit down and have a conversation for an hour and a half. And the reason is because we represent about 800,000 people across 13 parishes, and it's our job to represent them, not to represent ourselves, to represent them. And you know, when you look at what's been happening in Washington, I don't think it's been representing the people in this area. I don't think it's been representing the people around the country. I think that the divisiveness, the partisanship that you're seeing is completely out of hand. And this isn't some new message or thought that I had. You can go back and look at my comments on the Alton Sterling shootings, the police shootings, the Steve Scalise attacks, and many, many other times. This is not us. It is out of hand, and we're on a dangerous trajectory. Now, I believe that I can step out and condemn hate-filled talk and rhetoric. I can condemn evil mass shootings, and I can stand up for the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. I believe that we can have affordable, accessible, quality health care, and I don't think it has to be done with Medicare for all, that I don't think is Medicare, and I don't think it will lift health care opportunities for all. I think that I can stand up and detest and protest the absurd debt we have of this nation of more than $22 trillion, but can still advocate for principled spending for infrastructure, and of course stepping in to offer a lending hand for disaster victims when that occurs. I think that I can recognize that climate change is real and oppose legislative initiatives like the Green New Deal that I do not think are good for America and I think would be devastating for Louisiana. And to some of you, some of these comments, they may seem like they're entirely contradicting one another. I don't believe that at all. And I think when you look back at the 4.5 years that we've been in, virtually, every legislative success that we've had, every administrative success that we've had, have been based upon bipartisan support. And I would put our record up against just about anyone. Whether it is record transportation funding for the state of Louisiana, including funding for new lanes on I-10, including funds for the PQ exit, and including reforming, revising, changing the absurd Washington Street exit in this country, in this state, in this city. Including providing funds and helping to reform the CAT system that I stood right here about 3 years ago and beat up on. Not done, but we've made much progress, and we've worked closely with those folks to get that done. Including funding the 40-plus-year-old West Shore project that has been stuck. Again, 45 years been stuck. We authorized it in 2016 and secured $750 million. $750 million full funding for that project. Nearly $400 million for the Comey project, again, stuck for decades. $255 million for the Baton Rouge area flood control project, again, stuck for decades. And as a sidebar on that one, I had a good meeting this morning with Governor John Bell Edwards and Mayor Broome talking about a path forward there. Addressing this duplication of benefits issue that has been an awful policy quandary and re-victimized many of our disaster victims. Securing nearly $12 billion in funding in disaster recovery for our August 2016 flood. Addressing the red snapper absurdity, where we were prevented from being able to fish red snapper in the coastal area, despite the fact that we were able to do it year-round when I was a child. Passing legislation that requires FEMA and the Federal Highway Administration to establish new standards for the I-12 barrier that contributed to flooding on the north side of the interstate. Eliminating nearly $40 billion in deductible payments that were demanded of our school systems that flooded in Livingston, Ascension, and East Baton Rouge parishes, that prevented or impeded their ability to recover and maintain these absurd conditions where schools were on top of one another trying to educate our students. Establishing an arbitration process where we could challenge FEMA, an independent arbitration process where we could challenge FEMA's inappropriate conclusions on how to recover from the flood that was further slowing down or preventing our recovery from communities in this area. Securing record funding for Baton Rouge Airport. More recently, robocall bill that we were very involved in just passed out of House committee, as well as surprise medical billing legislation, both of which we were involved in. Within coming days, a bill that I wrote with Congressman Joe Kennedy of Massachusetts is headed to the president's desk for signature, making it easier for members of Congress to assist their constituents whenever they have demands in terms of casework or agency interaction, amending a law from 1974 that should have been revised decades ago. Working with Congressman Cicilline of Rhode Island and reauthorizing scenic byways. And countless amendments and bills this year and last with our own Louisiana Congressman Cedric Richmond. I believe that we can sit around and have rhetoric and partisan fights all day long, but when it comes down to policy, data and numbers often reveal the right path. And I don't think that has to be partisan. I don't think it has to be divisive. You know, I spoke this weekend at a rally that was a passing the flag rally. This flag had traveled, I think it was 10,000 miles across the country, going through all 48 states in the continental U.S. And it caused me to think a bit more about that very flag in this country and to think back to what so many of us have chosen to forget. And it's that issue of all of the sacrifice, dating back to George Washington, and the courage and the bravery and him stepping out and leading our young nation in this Declaration of Independence and fighting the best military in the world. Why? It was for our values, for our representation. And you think back to World War I, World War II, all these other conflicts that have happened and are happening now. You think about the sacrifices of our veterans, the veterans' families, and our domestic peacekeepers, the police officers today. And you look at the complete disrespect and disregard for those very people that allow me to stand here and criticize anyone from the President of the United States to anyone else in this nation. Their fight, their defense of freedom, allow me to do that. Allow us to choose who our representatives are. Allow us to voice priorities to Congress, including all the things that I just rattled off that we went through and addressed. Those weren't our priorities. Those were things that people identified to us. And look at this nation today. Look at how much disrespect we're giving to all of those veterans, to all of those dependents' families that have sacrificed so much for us. And that police video from New York City, disgusting. Watching the guys dump the water and throw buckets at the cops. That's disgusting. Look, I will have a policy fight with somebody all day long. I offered like 80 amendments on a bill in committee the other day because the bill was so, in fact, three bills were so stupid. And I wanted to point out over and over again how stupid their bills were. And I was going to make them take votes, pointing out the fact that these were dumb bills and they were awful for Louisiana. I'll have policy fights all day long when it's based upon policy, when it's based upon merit. But to see what we're allowing our country to devolve into is disgusting. You know, when you look back at what Vladimir Putin was actually trying to do in our 2016 elections, he was trying to interfere in the elections. He was. But you know how he was trying to do it? He was trying to do it by sowing divisiveness. That's really what he was trying to do. Trying to plan rallies of conflicting or competing groups within vicinity of one another, seeding these conflicts and crisis. Look at this country today. We have entirely bowed to that. And I think that the awful mass shootings, the divisiveness, and what's happening particularly in our national news media, it's not reflective of us. This country has become so prejudiced. You know, look at the Mueller report. Look at that whole thing. 99.9% of the time, if you voted for President Trump, then you went into that saying he's innocent and this is inappropriate. And 99% of the people who voted for another candidate are saying he's guilty and he needs to be impeached. That's not policy-based, it's not merit-based, and it disrespects our election process no matter where you are. Look, I'll be honest, I didn't vote for Governor Edwards, I didn't. But you know what? I respect the election process, and I work with him in areas when we agree. And that's why I was at the mansion this morning meeting with him. Now, there are a few areas where I think moving forward, we have an opportunity to work together. And I want to talk about two of them. One of them's at the state level, and one of them's at the national level. Number one, the state of Louisiana is incredibly blessed. And I'm not saying that trying to patronize people. Again, the stats, the statistics, the numbers, the data clearly shows it. You have statistics showing that we have one of the most productive workforces in the country, that we have more value added to products than virtually any other. That's a great thing, showing that people here have good work ethic. We have innovation, ingenuity. We work hard. That's great for Louisiana. And it's an asset for us when we're trying to lure businesses here and job opportunities here. We have readily available natural gas and oil here, and it's like virtually nowhere else, including the fact that we have these pipeline systems that distribute it virtually everywhere. And related to that, do you know that we have the lowest electricity prices in the United States? The lowest prices in the nation. If you have a ton of goods that you need to send somewhere, the most cost-effective way of you doing it is by putting it on a boat, on a barge, or on a ship. Do you know that we have 5 of the top tonnage ports in the United States? We can access 31 states through our riverways, through our port systems. Every single thing that I said, these are all gifts that we have here. These are all blessings that we have here. And when you look at these things, if you're a company looking if you're going to locate here or elsewhere, lowest electricity price, lowest price to transport goods, only one of 2 places in the nation have 6 Class 1 rail lines, only 2 places in the country. The ports, the rail lines, the airports we have here, the human capital, the people of Louisiana that are so productive. Lowest electricity prices. My gosh, what else do you need? This place should be a gold mine, and we're not seeing it. We're actually seeing a higher unemployment average than the national average. That's not okay. We should be leading the nation. And a few things, because I often talk to these CEOs after they've made their decision, whether it was coming to Louisiana or not. I often talk to them. And look, we hear a lot of different things, and there's good feedback in those, but I'll tell you some of them that I hear more than anything else. One, our tax code in Louisiana, and comparing it to Texas and Florida. Hear it over and over again. We've got to address that. And look, let's be clear. This is going to be a multi-year effort. This isn't anything you do in 6 months. We need to take a deliberate, careful approach on how to do this and how to do it better than anybody else. I think we made some substantial progress at the federal level, and I think it has helped to ignite the U.S. economy. It's helped to lower unemployment. It's helped to provide better opportunities for women, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and others. That's fantastic, seeing record unemployment numbers in those categories. I think we've got to do the same thing in Louisiana to help level the playing field, to help unleash some of the great assets that we have here. And one of the other things that I hear more than anything else is the litigious environment, and I think that it's embodied largely in what you see is us having some of the highest auto insurance rates in the nation. I don't want to pretend to understand why Representative Talbot's bill didn't go through. It's not okay that one of the only metrics that we're at the top, the state of Louisiana is at the top, is cost of auto insurance rates. That's not okay. We've got to figure out what the cause is. I can't tell you that Representative Talbot's bill was the solution, but we should not be at the top. We need to find the solutions, we need to implement them, and I think that if we can find the solutions, this is even an issue that we should consider calling a special election to address. Now, the other issue I wanted to bring up is the national one, and that's on climate change. Years ago, when I was working for the state of Louisiana, in the introduction, Jim mentioned that I worked for the state's coastal program. And in that program, we were tasked with taking limited dollars and determining where we could most effectively spend them. And what that caused us to do was looking at economic considerations and environmental considerations and project sustainability, which includes us looking at things like subsidence or the sinking of our land, the settling of our land, and things like sea rise. I cannot stand here honestly and tell you that climate is not changing, that our seas are not rising. We've measured it. I'd be lying if I told you anything else. We can get into all sorts of fights on the cause of the natural environment versus anthropogenic or human impacts. I don't think it's helpful. What I know is that coastal Louisiana is an incredible treasure for our nation and our state, and it is eroding at the greatest rate of anywhere else in this country. We've lost 2,000 square miles of our coast. That's taking the state of Rhode Island and eliminating it. It's taking virtually all the land in Delaware and eliminating it. Those states wouldn't stand for it, and we shouldn't either. We have, back when I was working for the state, I acknowledged sea rise, acknowledged climate change, and said that we need to take it into consideration. Does that mean that we need to stop producing fossil fuels? We need to further kill Louisiana's energy industry? Absolutely not. And let me explain. The United States today, a little known fact that is apparently inconvenient for many, we have reduced emissions greater than the next 12 countries combined. I'm going to say that again. We, the United States, is the leading reducer of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, to the tune to where we have reduced more than the next 12 countries combined. Nearly 1 billion tons in reduction. During that same period of time, as we've reduced 1 billion tons, China has increased 4 billion tons. We cannot solve this problem domestically. It's impossible. This is a global issue. The solution largely lies in what we're doing here. Louisiana has more export capacity of natural gas than every other state in the country combined. We also have extraordinary reserves of natural gas. The primary cause of this leading reduction in emissions has been transition to natural gas. Natural gas from Louisiana has a 13 to 14% lower emissions profile than that of Vladimir Putin. Therefore, we export our gas, we solve two problems. We help employment opportunities here, we drive up economic activity, and we help to reduce that grasp that Vladimir Putin has on global energy markets. Projects like Nord Stream 2 should not be happening. That should be Louisiana gas. I've had the opportunity to travel to Central and Eastern Europe. These countries are begging for our gas. We can continue moving forward with energy efficiency, conservation, and innovation, of which the United States has been the global leader, further reducing emissions from our oil and gas from Louisiana, as well as bringing online new energy streams. Look, here's the reality. You can sit here and dream all these utopian dreams and say that we're going to power our nation with unicorn tears if you want. The reality is, when you start looking at our transmission grid, it cannot sustain the transition to entire renewable portfolio. It can't, period. Approximately 2% of our world's energy today is produced by renewable energy. We can continue making progress. I just last week was in Boulder, Colorado for a climate hearing. You'll be shocked to learn I was the only Republican there. Walked up, saw signs held up that said oil and gas kills. You know what? Let's go ahead and take these utopian dreams. Let's do what they say. Let's cut off oil and gas in the United States. These lights go out right away. Right away. It's not feasible. Your transmission grid needs untold billions of dollars in renovations and changes, going from these facilities that are central and generating all these power to all these distributed systems for wind and solar. You don't have the energy storage capacity. What happens at night and what happens when the wind's not blowing? These intermittent sources of renewable energy. You know what you need? You need natural gas. You need nuclear. The United States can stay on a trajectory, I firmly believe, stay on a trajectory of being the world's leader in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, while continuing to have a growing and robust energy industry and job opportunities right here in Louisiana. I think that we can lead the world in efficiency, conservation, and innovation, and I think that we can increase Louisiana's global energy role by selling our natural gas and oil as we're seeing today. Our natural gas is going to 35 different countries around the world, and I think our oil is being exported to about 8. This is an opportunity for Louisiana, and as we're doing that, we can take some of these dollars from the energy production and reinvest them back into our coast, because here's the reality, another statistic that many people don't really like to talk about. We can cut all emissions from the United States today, and we're probably going to see 75 to 100 years of change in our climate. We can cut all emissions from around the globe. You are going to continue to see these changes. So we can be stupid. We can be stupid and carry out some of these policies that will devastate the United States economy, that will disproportionately impact Louisiana. Or we can move forward in this effort that we are trying to lead, where we're redefining this issue, where it doesn't have to be a partisan issue, where we can truly be global leaders right here in Louisiana and helping to address our coastal sustainability issues, as well as the global climate changes that we're seeing around the nation. And I'm very, very confident that we can do that. And the first thing out of the gate needs to be recognizing that it's going to continue changing for decades, and we've got to focus on adaptation. The Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority in Louisiana, the Water Institute here, can be leaders in what is our $50 to $70 billion problem in Louisiana and what is our multi-trillion-dollar problem around the world. So I'll say it again. We can continue on this trajectory of all of this rhetoric, of all of this bipartisan conflict and fighting, or we can choose a different model where we depressurize the situation, we diffuse the tension, we allow the data, the metrics to guide us in our policy decisions, and we can move forward in a way that respects the sacrifice of so many of our veterans and their families, the police officers, and all those that have sacrificed so much, so I can stand here and say the things that I'm saying, and y'all can stand there or sit, and you can say things contrary and criticize me. Because that sacrifice is absolutely priceless. You look back at the history of this country where we've had conflict, we have been able to work together, and I absolutely hate the fact that it takes things like September 11th, Hurricane Katrina, and the August 2016 flood to get Republicans and Democrats to come together to work toward a common goal. I think the crisis is now. I think we have things to work together on, and I think we can get things done without sacrificing principle. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions or criticism that you have. So, yeah.
The reduction in
greenhouse gas emissions.
reduction in global warming that you're talking about by switching natural gas. So if you think it's a mistake that not including in your presentation, that's because of the switch from coal to natural gas. Natural gas, when it burns, still combines with oxygen and creates carbon dioxide.
What's the question?
So shouldn't your conversation, if you're going to be truthful to the Louisiana people, tell them that this change is because we switched from coal?
So what he's saying is that I need to be, quote, truthful to people when I'm talking about this reduction in emissions, that it is because of a transition from coal to natural gas. I'm not sure how anything I said was not truthful. There is huge opportunity for us. It's not just switching from coal to natural gas. There's a lot more complexity in it than that. For example, if you transition from an older gas-fired electrification plant to a newer one, in some cases you can reduce your emissions profile by up to 80%. So it's not just that. Also looking at ways to build upon some of our efforts to capture fugitive emissions and other things. There are all sorts of things that we have learned in recent years that goes well beyond just the transition. The other thing is the United States being the leader in efforts to improve energy efficiency, conservation, and entirely new ways to transmit energy. I mean, the U.S. has been a leader in all these things, and there's a combination of things that have led to our reductions, including, quite frankly, emissions-free nuclear power. Yes, sir.
This morning, the president came out in support of the universal background checks. Does it cause you to rethink your vote against H.R. 8?
He's asking if the president's statements today supporting universal background checks causes me to reflect upon my vote on H.R. 8, which was legislation that passed through the House earlier this year, and I did oppose it. No, it doesn't. And let me be very clear. Mark, this is a huge issue, and look, I'm a father of 3 kids. I've received those text messages alerts saying that our schools locked down, our kids' schools locked down. It scares the hell out of me, candidly. We are going to make a grave error if we come out and we pass legislation like H.R. 8 and then pat ourselves on the back and say we've done it. None other than the conservative Washington Post, and yes, that was a joke, did an analysis years ago where they looked at every gun control bill that had been introduced, every single one of them that had been introduced by Democrats, and came out after the Pulse nightclub shooting and said, you know what? This was in response to a comment that Senator Rubio made. Said, you know what? Actually, if these bills had passed, it wouldn't have stopped. It wouldn't have prevented these disasters or massacres from happening. The reality is, Mark, and let me say it again, this is where we get into dangerous situation. And I'm going to go back to my comments earlier about data and metrics. They don't lie. The people that did these shootings, whether it's Pulse nightclub or Sutherland Springs, Texas, or San Bernardino or Parkland High School, these people went through and were approved under background checks. At the same time, every single one of those people that I named, including, I think it was the shooter from the weekend, I think it was the Ohio shooter, actually were flagged by peers, were flagged to law enforcement. The Parkland High School shooter had been flagged like 26 times. What we did is we passed something called Fix NICS. We passed that. That's law today under a Republican Congress. And I think it's efforts like that that recognize that there is data out there in many cases where people are flagged. It is not being properly incorporated into the background check system, the NICS system. For example, the Sutherland Springs, Texas shooter, he actually had offenses on his law enforcement profile that made him ineligible to get the gun, but it wasn't integrated. We've got to take that information and get it out there. The reality is this, and again, inconvenient truth. The reality is that any transaction between a firearms dealer and anyone else, you have to have a background check. If the data that you're using to do the check is inappropriate or insufficient or it has gaps in it, that's the problem. We've got to make sure that we have every drop of data, relevant law enforcement data, make sure that it is in that system to identify those that have been flagged. one of the shooters this weekend shot his own sister. I mean, look, there's nothing normal about this. You know, and something else that's really important. If we're going to sit here and say, oh, it's universal background checks, and that's going to solve it. Do you know how many guns there are in the country today? Anybody know that number? How many guns are in the country today? We have nearly 400 million guns. 400 million. Do you really think that some background check or some gun ban is gonna suddenly make murders or mass shootings go away? No, it's not going to. And we're going to make, I'm going to say it again, a grave error if we're going to come in and pass these things that emotionally make us feel good and don't do a damn thing about the violence that's out there. And Mark, not that I anticipated a question on this, but look what I just happen to have in this pocket. This is a slide from Washington, D.C., where they came out and they passed a handgun ban. They passed the handgun ban right here, and then it was repealed right there. I don't know if you can see that spike. Murders went up. Let me remind you of something. Murder is illegal. Murder is illegal. Shooting people is illegal. So if you suddenly come in and say, oh, we're just going to ban guns.
Well, the guns may be coming from Virginia, which is next door to Washington.
But
Are you saying, Congressman, that we should have fewer guns? You just said we had 400 million.
No.
No.
But Jim, Jim is asking if we should have more guns. And Jim, no, what I'm saying is that if you're going to say that some gun ban or whatever is going to prevent murders from happening, that's simply wrong. You've got a black market on guns. You've got hundreds of millions of guns that will never, ever, ever, ever be taken out of criminals' hands. And so you can't simply come in and say, oh, we're gonna pass another law and make it doubly illegal and expect criminals to come out and do this. Now let me be clear. One, I think that we need to do a better job integrating data and threats into the NICS system, the background check system. That's very important. Number two, you can look at themes on virtually all of these mass shootings. And what do you see? And Jim, I've gone out, I've met with police officers, I've met with school counselors, I've met with psychiatrists, psychologists, all sorts of people that deal with this kind of stuff on a daily basis. And I've done it, I'm going to take a guess at 50 times. And I'm going to tell you what, while you get different recommendations, I'll tell you one of them that comes up every single time is that you've got to make sure that when children grow up, they grow up in an environment where they're unconditionally loved. You hear suggestions like when you have those people that start going off the grid, those people that are becoming loners, that you've got to grab them and bring them back in. That when you see your friends and your relatives, when you see them going out and starting posting manifestos and other very clear signals that something's wrong, that you've got to do something about it. And Jim, I think we would be making a mistake if we're going to come in and say that government is going to come in and serve as the surrogate for my family, for my church, for my teacher, for my schools. This is to a large degree an issue about people. We have substantially increased funds for mental health at the federal government, for drug abuse, trying to help turn the corner for these people, and right here in Baton Rouge with the mental health tax that was passed in December. Keep in mind, these people are breaking the law, and there is nothing mentally sane about people that are carrying out these mass murders. The guy shot his own sister. This is crazy. And we've got to get those people and make sure that we bring them in and that we get them the help they need to prevent this from happening. Almost every single one of these people had warning signs. There were flags that were there.
Since you're on the subject of mental health, a lot of people just don't have the accessibility, even with government programs, because some of them just don't qualify. What about private policies? Has there been any move to perhaps push for private insurers to maybe focus more on mental health care than they have in the past? Because a lot of them just completely walk away from.
John's saying that in many cases that you have folks that that don't have access to mental health care. And so a few things. Number one, mental health is an essential health benefit, which means it has to be covered. Number two, I think there was a problem at the federal level and many others where you had the general population and you had criminals. And as we know, folks with mental health problems, in many cases, they don't fit in either one of those buckets. They can't properly socialize or assimilate with general population, and they don't deserve to be in jail. But oftentimes there were not options in between. And so at the federal level, we did pass legislation that largely defined this area in between, that provided substantial federal dollars to help address that. Much of that money has come right here to Louisiana. I'll also note that in addition to it being a central health benefit, in addition to the federal funds, right here in Baton Rouge, the mental health program that is kicking off here to help provide assistance there as well. But look, let me say this again. I do not think that we're going to come in and solve this just by having government step in and play the surrogate for family members, play the surrogate for teachers, for schools, churches, and others. This is a community problem where we all need to step in and provide some personal assistance to those friends, relatives, and associates that are having problems. Yes, sir.
The federal government today is borrowing about 25 cents out of every dollar. That amounts to about $6,000 per year per worker. $1 trillion a year. How low can we continue to go on this path?
Oh, look, I voted against the debt limit. I voted against the one before that and the one before that, and I will continue doing it. I have supported legislation that balanced budget amendment. I have supported legislation that said that if Congress doesn't balance the budget, they don't get paid. I believe that I've supported legislation that said that if the government shuts down, members of Congress shouldn't get paid and they should have to report to work 7 days a week. Look, when you start looking, again, datas don't lie. Just met with a liberal Democrat who all he was doing was crunching numbers and just trying to show us some of the data that's out there. What they refer to as these mandatory spending programs. Those programs, the programs that Congress does not appropriate on an annual basis, decades ago they encompassed less than 20% of the overall federal budget. Today, they're approaching 80%, which means, let me be clear on what this means. It means that when Congress does their annual funding bills, we don't appropriate money for them. It's just automatic out of the Treasury. And many of those, as they've had lawsuits and changes in laws and other things, they've just been in expansion. They've been in expansion, going from less than 20% to approaching 80% of our overall budget. I've introduced legislation in the last Congress, for example, to help connect job training and job assistance programs with those who are on food stamps. Those who are on the SNAP program benefits. That program alone would have saved billions and billions annually and was proven under pilot programs in Maine, Kansas, Alabama, and others to help transition those people into the workforce, getting them the job skills that they needed. There are existing federally funded programs, connecting them with the skills for the jobs that are actually available. That passed the House of Representatives. The Senate rejected it. Until we address that mandatory spend program, we are going to be on this downward, unsustainable spiral. And it does scare me. I think it is an awful, awful problem. And I think that one of it's a blunt instrument, but I think that one of the things that we ought to do is we literally should come in and pass something that says if Congress doesn't balance the budget, we should not get paid. If you don't do your job, you don't get paid. If we don't do ours, we shouldn't get paid either. It's ugly, but it's a major forcing factor for us to do our job. I think there should be a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget. I'll support it every day of the week. But the fact that all these people are unwilling or don't have the courage to touch the mandatory spending programs is wrong.
You alluded to the Mueller report in your remarks, but I don't think you said one way or another. Do you believe the president committed obstruction of justice?
Actually, I released a very clear statement on that. I did. I do not. Do I think that stupidity was committed? Yes, I do. I think stupidity was committed by many people associated with the campaign. Do I think that there was an overt breaking of the law? No, I don't. And you can look at the Inspector General from the Department of Justice, you can look at the Judiciary Committee, Oversight and Government Reform Committee, House Select Committee on Intelligence, Senate Intelligence Committee, Mueller report. You have had thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of investigation that have been done, of reports that have been issued. Again, often found stupidity. And you found that people associated with the campaign and people under the Obama administration broke the law, broke policies, did things that were unethical. And those people should be held accountable. But I have not seen anything that rises to the level anywhere near a threshold of impeachment or others. And so what I said, one of the things I said in our statement that we released on this is that, and it's similar to what I said earlier in this talk, people took away or are taking away from that the very things that were consistent with their bias, with their prejudice. If you supported the president, then you went in, didn't even read the thing, and said that he's innocent and this is a witch hunt. And if you voted against him and you dislike him, then you went the other route. And there are many other things right here in Louisiana and in the United States that have that same level of bias or prejudice going into it, where people do the same thing. And so there's my answer. We issued a clear statement on this, I think, twice. So, yes, sir. And I'm sorry, that was about the takeaway from the Mueller report.
I'm just following up on that just a little bit.
Sure.
And I'm gonna tell you, this phone actually replaced one that I had when I was a candidate for attorney general just a few years ago. Of course, you know that I respect everything that you have done when you were both state and parties going out with that.
Sure.
What is your
You being
question?
a Republican, I being a Democrat. Here's my question. If I think I might have reasonably credible evidence that Russian meddling with our elections in this country might have actually began in the 2015 campaign. And some metadata in this phone or the one it replaced might back up that assertion. I want to know, who do I deliver that information to? Who can I trust to give it to? I don't know whether I can trust the FBI. I don't know whether I can trust even the CIA at this point. But I do believe I have some information that I want to impart. I can give it to you because I trust you.
Okay, what's the question?
My question is,
Look, I'm happy to connect you with law enforcement folks that actually do this, but I guess I'm curious, if the election happened in 2015 or 2016, why is this coming up now?
well, from what I understand, everything in connection with the Mueller testimony and the investigations and everything was in connection with the 2016 election. But I believe Russian interference in meddling may have actually preceded that. I think it might have.
Well, I think you made a point that has been proven, that it did precede that. And I think that there were actually briefs during the Obama administration indicating that there were efforts by Russia to come in and interfere in our elections prior to. And because I remember reading folks who were criticizing President Obama for not being more aggressive. And look, criticism's all over the place, and I'm sure that there's ample responsibility. We can blame everybody if we want. But bottom line is, we need to focus on actual solutions and preventing them from coming in and having an interference in our elections. And I'm sorry,
I guess I'm saying I got my personal.
okay,
And I-
love to talk to you about it after and see if we can connect you with the right folks.
Thank you.
So let's see, there's a hand. Brittany, sure. I'm sorry.
Regarding that meeting with the president of the government this morning, is that range funding set to expire anytime soon? And can we expect meetings for that?
Yeah. Thank you. Brittany is asking if, with the Baton Rouge area flood control funds, the $255 million that we secured in legislation in February, but ultimately secured the funding for the project in early July of last year, is that fund? Are those funds a threat to be taken away? And how did the meeting go? Is that fair? Okay. So number one, we received word on Friday from the Corps of Engineers that these funds are at risk. We knew it was coming. We knew that there was going to be a backstop or a deadline. It is not often that you have $255 million, $250 million sitting around that folks aren't willing to come grab. We have $100 billion backlog in Corps of Engineer project authorizations around the country. I assure you, there are people who want our $255 million. We have been talking to and meeting with our governor and our mayor on a regular basis, corresponding with them. There is a project in West Virginia and a project in Hawaii that are potentially experiencing a similar fate as our projects. So 3 projects in the country now that have funds at risk. We had a very candid meeting this morning. I'm just going to say stay tuned. We're trying to track down a few curveballs that have kind of come up recently, trying to track down a few things, but stay tuned, and I think that, that there'll be more information on that in the very near future.